1,500 years ago, when the Roman world was falling apart and fear was spreading like wildfire across Europe, a small group of desperate people made a decision that sounded like madness. They didn't run toward the mountains. They didn't hide behind stone walls. They sailed straight into a swamp. Yes, a swamp. Shallow water, soft mud, unstable ground where even standing still could pull you under. No fresh drinking water, no solid earth, no protection. Just marshland, fog, and the endless sound of waves brushing against tiny islands barely rising above sea level. And yet, from that impossible beginning, a city was born. A city that should never have survived. A city built on water. That city is called Venice. But here's the twist. Venice wasn't just built near water, it was built on top of it. Entire palaces, massive churches, crowded marketplaces, and stone bridges, all resting on what was once nothing more than mud and wooden sticks driven into the ground. How did they do it? How did people with no modern machines, no steel foundations, and no advanced technology create one of the most breathtaking cities in human history? And more importantly, how is it still standing today? To understand the impossible engineering of Venice, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time of chaos, invasion, and survival. In the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was collapsing. Barbarian tribes like the Visigoths and the Huns were sweeping across Europe, attacking cities, burning towns, and destroying everything in their path. Northern Italy was no longer safe. Families who had lived comfortably under Roman protection suddenly found themselves running for their lives. They had nowhere to go. Behind them were invaders. In front of them was the Adriatic Sea. Scattered across the shallow waters of the Venetian lagoon were more than 100 small marshy islands. These islands weren't solid land. They were muddy patches rising just above the tide. No one lived there permanently. There were no farms, no roads, no fresh water wells. It was the last place anyone would choose. But when death is chasing you, even a swamp can feel like hope. So they escaped by boat. At first, they believed it would be temporary, a short stay until the danger passed. They built small wooden huts on the islands. Life was harsh. The ground was soft and unstable. Every step felt uncertain. Food was limited to fish and whatever they could trade. Drinking water had to be brought from the mainland. Many wanted to go back, but going back meant facing armies that showed no mercy. And slowly, something changed. Instead of seeing the lagoon as a weakness, they began to see it as protection. Enemy armies were strong on land, but useless in shallow marshes. Large war horses and heavy weapons couldn't move through mud and water. The very weakness of the islands became their greatest defense. Still, defense alone wasn't enough. If they were going to survive long term, they needed to solve a bigger problem. How do you build a city on mud? Here's where the real genius begins. The soil of the lagoon was soft clay and sand. If you placed heavy stones directly on it, they would sink. Even a simple wall could slowly disappear underground. Traditional foundations were impossible. So the Venetians thought differently. They looked beneath the mud. Under the soft upper layers of the lagoon, several meters down, there was a much harder layer of compact clay. If they could somehow reach that layer, they could create stability. But how? The answer was wood. Thousands, no millions of wooden piles were driven deep into the mud until they reached the solid clay below. These weren't small sticks. They were long trunks of trees, mainly alder, oak, and larch, brought from forests in northern Italy and what is now modern Croatia. Workers would hammer these wooden poles down through the soft mud, 5 meters, sometimes more. They were placed extremely close together, side by side, forming dense clusters. Think about that for a second. No cranes, no modern drills, just human labor, simple tools, and relentless determination. Once enough wooden piles were packed tightly together, they created a stable platform. On top of these piles, wooden planks were laid horizontally. Then heavy stone blocks were placed above them to form the actual foundation. And here's the unbelievable part. Normally, wood rots in water, but in Venice, the wooden piles have survived for over 1,000 years. Why? Because the piles are completely submerged underwater and buried in mud, where there is almost no oxygen. Without oxygen, the bacteria that cause wood to rot cannot survive. Over time, the minerals in the water actually harden the wood, turning it almost stone-like. Those ancient wooden poles are still there today, holding up massive buildings. And what buildings they are! Palaces like the Doge's Palace stand proudly on these wooden foundations. The breathtaking St. Mark's Basilica, with its golden mosaics and domes, rests on the same hidden forest beneath the water. An entire city balanced on timber. But the challenges didn't stop there. As Venice grew, it didn't expand outward like normal cities. There was no land to spread into. Instead, it connected island to island. At first, people used boats to travel between them, but as the population increased and trade exploded, boats were not enough. They needed bridges.
The earliest bridges were simple wooden structures. They worked, but not for long. Fires, storms, and heavy crowds often destroyed them. One of the most important areas of Venice was the commercial center known as Rialto. Merchants from across Europe gathered there to trade spices, silk, and precious goods. Connecting Rialto was crucial. After several failed wooden bridges, the Venetians decided to attempt something bold, a permanent stone bridge. Many doubted it couldn't be done. A massive stone structure over water supported by wooden piles? It sounded risky, but they went ahead. In the late 16th century, the famous Rialto Bridge was completed. Built on thousands of wooden piles driven into the canal bed, it supported a heavy stone arch that still stands today. People feared it would collapse. It didn't. Instead, it became a symbol of Venetian strength. And then there were the canals. Unlike most cities with roads filled with carts and horses, Venice developed a completely different transportation system. Streets were replaced by waterways. Boats became the main vehicles. The most famous canal, the Grand Canal, curves through the city like a giant S shape, lined with elegant buildings reflecting in the water. This design wasn't just beautiful, it was practical. Goods could be delivered directly by boat to homes and markets. There was no congestion of carts. Trade flowed smoothly. Location also played a huge role. Venice sits at the top of the Adriatic Sea, connecting Western Europe to the Mediterranean and beyond. Ships traveling between Europe and the Middle East naturally pass nearby. Venice became a powerful trading empire. Wealth poured in, and with wealth came even more ambitious construction. But success created new problems. One of the biggest was drinking water. Surrounded by salt water, Venice had no natural freshwater rivers. Wells dug directly into the ground filled with salty water. Importing fresh water by boat worked at first, but as the population grew into the tens of thousands, it became impossible to rely only on shipments. They needed a solution, so they engineered one. In open squares, large underground cisterns were built. Workers dug deep pits, lined with waterproof clay, and filled the surrounding space with sand. Rainwater from rooftops was directed through pipes into these sand-filled areas. As the water filtered through the sand, it was purified before collecting in a central well shaft. It was a natural filtration system, simple but brilliant. Each neighborhood shared these wells. Over 600 were built across the city. Rain became life. And then there was sewage. In most cities, underground sewer systems carry waste away, but in Venice there was no solid underground to build such tunnels. Instead, waste drained directly into canals. It sounds shocking today, but nature helped. The tides of the Adriatic Sea rise and fall twice daily. When the tide comes in, fresh seawater flows into the canals. When it goes out, it pulls much of the waste back toward the sea. This natural flushing system kept the canals cleaner than one might expect. Still, living in Venice required constant adaptation. And here's the emotional part of the story. Everything in Venice is fragile. The city is slowly sinking. Natural subsidence causes it to drop by about 1 to 2 millimeters each year. Rising sea levels add even more pressure. During winter months, high tides known as aqua alta flood streets and squares. Walkways disappear underwater. Shops close. Residents wade through ankle-deep floods. Yet the city remains. For centuries, Venetians have fought against the sea, not with anger, but with intelligence. Modern projects like MOS, a system of movable barriers, were designed to protect the lagoon from extreme tides. But even before modern engineering, the true miracle was the mindset. These were people who refused to accept defeat. They didn't complain that the land was unstable. They created stability. They didn't curse the lack of fresh water. They captured rain. They didn't fear the sea. They turned it into roads. And today, more than 60,000 residents still live in Venice. Oh, millions of visitors arrive every year to witness its beauty. Most walk across their bridges without realizing that beneath their feet lies a hidden forest. Millions of wooden pillars silently holding history above water. That's what makes Venice more than just a city. It's a testament to human will. Imagine standing there 1,500 years ago, surrounded by mud and uncertainty. No guarantee of survival, no promise of success, just hope and the determination to build something impossible. Most people would have given up. They didn't. They built palaces where others saw swamps. They built bridges where others saw water. They built a civilization where others saw the end. And maybe that's the real lesson of Venice. Sometimes the ground beneath you feels unstable. Sometimes life gives you nothing solid to stand on. But stability isn't always found. Sometimes it's created. Venice should not exist. And yet it does. Floating between water and sky, balancing history and survival, whispering a quiet message to the world. Impossible is only impossible until someone builds it anyway.